From dusk to dawn, one night in 1964, a deer hunter sat trapped in the top of a pine tree, firing hunting arrows down at a robot that would not fall. Every few minutes, the thing breathed up a white smoke that knocked him out cold, and every time he came to, the figures at the base of his tree had climbed a little higher up the trunk. His name was Donald Shrum. He was completely alone with a hunting bow and a few books and matches, and he was going to need both before sunrise. He made it to sunrise, barely, and a few weeks later, men in Air Force uniforms sat him down with a tape recorder and left with one of his arrows. I'm Carol Ann. Welcome to the In-Between. Don Shrum wasn't a man who went looking for any of this. A factory worker out at the Aerojet missile plant near Sacramento. That was his whole world, along with his wife Judy and daughter Donna. On the weekends, he hunted deer with a bow because he liked the quiet and had better luck. He was good in the woods, practical, the kind of guy who solves a problem with whatever's in his pockets, which, it turns out, is exactly the kind of man this story needed. Now, what happened that night has only one direct witness, and that's Don himself. One man, alone, in the dark. But the investigators who spent years with him, who tried the hardest to break his story, couldn't do it. And there's a piece of this that doesn't depend on Don at all. It depends on the United States government and on what they did the moment they heard about it. Stick with me, because the back half of this one is where it stops being a campfire story. There's a paper trail, and underneath the paper trail, there's a pattern a whole lot older than the Air Force. So, let's head to the woods. Friday, September 4th, 1964. Don, who's 26 at the time, and two hunting partners, Vincent Alvarez and Tim Trueblood, two guys Don works with at Aerojet. They drive up from Sacramento toward Lake Tahoe and make camp near Cisco Grove in the Tahoe National Forest. It's bow season, and after setting up camp, the three guys, all experienced outdoorsmen, head out for an afternoon hunt. They're on three separate paths, all in sight of each other, until Don realizes the ridge he's on is a little problematic. He can't circle his way back to camp. He has to backtrack. Not a big deal, except for this pesky little thing called sunset. Camp is only maybe a mile off in a straight line, but a straight line out here means crossing peaks and ravines in the pitch black. And he knows that's not a bright idea. There are bears in these woods, mountain lions. A man on the ground at night is a man on the menu. So Don does what a smart woodsman does. He finds a big pine tree where the first branches are a good 12 feet off the ground. He climbs on a rock right at the base, jumps up and climbs till he finds a reasonably comfy spot. Straddling one of the limbs, lays his bow across two branches in front of him and waits for morning. He doesn't wait long. He sees a white light in the distance, but it's moving wrong, zigzagging, low, dipping below treetops, heading his way. Don's first thought is a reasonable one. It's a helicopter. His friends got worried, called it in, and now there's a search party out looking for him. So he climbs down, lights three fires on three separate rocks below, and stands there waving his arms and shouting, doing everything you're supposed to do to get found. The light stops. And whatever it is, it's not a helicopter. No rotor, no engine, no sound at all. It just hangs there. And that little detail completely freaks Don out. He scrambles back up into the tree to watch it from the closest thing to cover that he's got. The light, which looks to be about 10 to 12 inches in diameter, continues moving as it swings out over a canyon and stops about 50 yards away. That's when Don realizes that light is not an independently floating entity. That light is attached to something larger. Way larger. It's an area he estimates to be over 100 feet long, blotting out the stars in the sky. It has three rectangular panels that shimmer like aluminum foil in front of a fire. As Don's trying to wrap his head around what this thing might be, there's a flash at the middle panel and a smaller piece detaches and drops off into the brush in a nearby rise. It looks to be dome-shaped with a light on the top. Then he hears it. Down in the brush, something moving toward the tree. More than one something. 2 figures come out of the dark and stop at the bottom of his tree. They're short, little over 5 feet. They're wearing light-colored, tight-fitting clothes that cover them from head to toe, like a uniform with an attached helmet. In Don's own words,
"It was just like a human form, with the exception it didn't have a neck. It just a head. It looked like just a head on the shoulder."
At first, the beings are just looking around at all the plants on the ground like they're on a high school biology field trip. Don thinks, hey, I'm dressed head to toe in camo. Maybe if I stay still, they won't see me. That idea seems to work for a while until they look up at him. And Don knows his cover is blown if it was ever there at all. The 2 beings go for the tree and start trying to climb, one trying to boost the other up, looking like the 2 stooges who've evidently never tried to climb a tree before. Every time it looks like they're making progress, Don shakes the tree, which sends them scattering for cover. And then the 3rd one arrives. This one is different, darker, heavier. Doesn't move like the other 2. And where they have faces, this thing has 2 eyes that stop Don cold.
2 big eyes coming through working its way down this hill. And they just all the size of a silver dollar, and they look like they had actual flame inside.
It walks up to the base of the tree, roughly 12 feet down from where Don is sitting. And then its lower jaw drops open, kind of like the jaw on the Iron Giant. Something comes out.
Kind of white smoke was coming out of its mouth. And in the next instant, I started kind of gasping for breath, and I kind of temporarily lost consciousness.
That's the part that turns this from frightening into something worse. The smoke reaches him and he can't breathe. No smell to it, no odor. It was just like the air had stopped being air. Down he goes, pitching forward across the bow laid over the limbs, the one thing that keeps him from falling. He comes to, after what could only have been a couple of minutes, feeling sick to his stomach. After a couple of dry heaves, he looks down. They're still there. And Don decides he's done being an NPC in his own nightmare. He takes stock of what he's carrying. Now, before he reaches for any of it, think for a second about what Don Shrum actually had on him up that tree. Not what he wished he had, what he packed days earlier, back when this was just a quiet deer hunting weekend. Because everything he does from here, he does it with whatever he happened to bring. And most of us are one forgotten thing away from our own bad night. Not robots, hopefully. More like the birthday you blanked on. The grandkid whose list you swore you'd remember. The gift you wrapped that turned out to be the exact thing you gave them last Christmas, because who can keep track of it all? So here's the honest part. I didn't go hunting for a gift app. I had one I liked for years, and then the people who made it kept stripping out the parts I used the most. I complained about it loud enough that my husband, Mr. InBetween, got tired of hearing it and built me my own. That's GiftFlow. It holds the whole Christmas list in one place. Every person, every idea, what you gave them last year so you never double up, and a little check that tells you whether the thing you ordered online has actually shown up yet. The idea you had back in July, still right there in December. Lives on your phone. No ads, no data collection, no subscription. Don faced his night with a bow and whatever was in his pockets. You get to face yours with the whole list handled before anybody's at the door. Scan the QR code or click the link in the description. Get Christmas under control with GiftFlow. Now, let's get back to Don and his personal inventory. It's not much. His bow and a few arrows, a few books and matches, his wallet, the clothes on his back, and a hat. Against 3 things that climbed out of a craft and make no noise, That's his whole arsenal. I guess it'll have to do. First, the matches. He noticed when the robot creature came into view that it stopped and brushed aside the glowing embers of one of the rescue fires Don had lit. So Don thought, well, maybe they don't like fire. So he grabs his matches, lights one, and drops it down. And it works a little. The figures flinch back from the fire a good 50 to 75 feet. But then they come back again. So he lights more of them and drops them down. And each time, the beings going a little less far away and returning a little quicker. So Don needs a bigger fire. He starts with his hat. And considering that every dapper gentleman in the 60s uses hair grease, that went up like a torch. It even made the shadowy craft bolt straight up in the air for a time. And the beings seemed to be more concerned with running away than the fact that their ride had just left. But it doesn't last forever. So he starts feeding the fire with strips of his camo, then anything burnable in his wallet, including his hunting license and dollar bills. He threw his canteen and all the coins in his pocket too. And by the time he's done, he's down to a t-shirt, jeans, and hope. So Don reaches for the bow. He knocks an arrow, draws a bead on the robot's chest, and lets it fly.
Shot my bow at him. I hit this one that was made out of metal. It shoved him back a little bit, but that's all it did.
The impact creates a bright spark and the sound of metal on metal. The thing rocks back, and then it just resets. Whatever Don's arrows are made of, it's not even close to being strong enough to even dent this thing. He fires 2 more arrows, but they don't do anything more than the first one did. With his arrows gone, Don climbs higher near the top of the tree and loops his belt around the trunk just in case. And he learns the one rule that keeps him alive that night. When he moves, when he shakes the tree and makes a racket, they back off. He even tries howling like a coyote. But eventually, they always come back, and the robot gasses him again. When he wakes up, he dry heaves again and sees the smaller beings trying to climb the tree. So he can't rest. He can't stop. And this endless loop of making a racket, getting gassed, waking up, heaving, and scaring the creatures away again goes on all night. At one point, what little hope he had disappears. He looks down the far side of the tree and sees the branches hang over the steep canyon walls. He considers undoing the belt and just letting himself fall. But the thought of his wife and 1-year-old daughter managed to reignite his fight. At some point, a second robot walks out of the woods to join the party. Just as Don sees the eastern horizon starting to turn gray with the impending sunrise, that second robot joins the first, and the two of them do a thing Don never could quite explain. They stand facing each other, and the air between them fills with bright flashes, like an electrical arc jumping back and forth. Then the smoke rolls up thicker than before, a real cloud of it up through the branches, and Don Shrum blacks out for the last time. When he wakes up, it's that gray, no-color light just before dawn. He's not sitting in the tree anymore. He's hanging off the side of it, held up by the belt he was smart enough to tie around the tree.
I was hanging from my belt up by the top of the tree, and when I got down, I looked around, there was nothing there.
Nothing. No craft, no figures, no robot, just a cold mountain and a man who can barely make his hands work. He lowers himself down, and on the ground he finds the proof that he didn't dream it. Little footprints all over that look like someone wearing moccasins. Burnt scraps of his own clothes, his canteen, and 2 of his arrows. The only thing that he can see that's gone is the coins. Don starts making his way back to camp with his canteen, his bow, and the 2 arrows, but only makes it about a half a mile before exhaustion takes over and he lays down. He wakes up just a few minutes later to a whistle. It's his friend, Vincent Alvarez, out looking for him. Don gets Vincent's attention, and the 2 head back to camp. Vincent and Tim wrap him in blankets and set him by the fire. Don is freezing. The temperatures that night went down to about freezing. After he warms up a little bit and has some soup, he crashes for about 6 hours. And then he wakes up and he tells Vincent and Tim everything. And they believe him. And here's the first crack of corroboration in a one-witness story. Vincent Alvarez had gotten turned around while heading back to Camp 2, and Vincent saw it. A glowing thing coming down low and slow over the trees. At first, he thought it was just a shooting star, but he told Don he'd never seen a shooting star come in that low and last that long. He didn't see the robots, but he saw the ride. The boys pack everything up and head home. When they bring Don through his own front door, his wife Judy knows something bad has gone down. Don looked as white as a sheet and was all shaky. He sits down on the couch and tells her, "I have something I have to tell you." Judy listens, and she believes him too. So we've got a story, a wild one. The kind that gets a man laughed out of a room. And it would have stayed exactly that, one hunter's impossible night, if other people hadn't started behaving very strangely about it. Now, if Don Shrum made it all up, he picked a set of details that, it turns out, a lot of other people have reached for too. People who couldn't have compared notes with him. People separated from him by whole decades and whole oceans. I'm going to lay a few side by side and you can tell me what you think when we're done. I'm not going to connect the dots for you. I'm just going to put them all on the table. The morning of August 14th, 1947, in the mountains of northern Italy, near a village called Via Santina, a painter named Luigi Rapuzzi is out working on a landscape. Around 9 in the morning, he notices a disc sitting in the field, maybe 150 feet off. Next to it are two small figures, barely 3 feet tall, wearing snazzy dark blue outfits with red trim, belts, and collars. They have helmets with only the face showing through, and the faces are greenish-brown with big, round eyes. Rapuzzi does the friendly thing. He hails them, raises a hand. Cha! And one of them reaches to the center of its belt, and a puff of vapor comes out, and Rapuzzi drops where he stands. He lays on the ground, paralyzed, but fully aware. The little figures walk over, pick up his easel, look him over, climb back aboard, and leave. A smoke that paralyzes. Helmeted figures from a disc. And the man who reported it would go on to become a respected science fiction writer, which cuts both ways, and I'll let you weigh that for yourself. But he told this story before Don Shrum was ever in a tree, and the heart of it is the same. The smoky vapor that takes you out. Now jump to August 19th, 1952, West Palm Beach, Florida. A scoutmaster named Sonny DeVerges is driving 3 Boy Scouts home when he spots a light off in a palmetto thicket. Thinking maybe somebody's crashed, he pulls over, grabs a machete and a flashlight, and tells the boys, "If I'm not back in 15 minutes, go get help." And then he pushes into the brush. He's gone for a while, but the boys can see the light from his flashlight bobbing around in the bushes. And then they see a red glow light up the whole area, and the flashlight goes out. The boys run to a neighboring farm to call the police. When Sonny finally comes back, he comes scrambling up out of that thicket, waving the machete and babbling. And the deputy who showed up, a man named Mott Parton, said in 19 years of police work, he'd never seen anyone so terrified in his life. DeVerges is burned, singed hair, burns on his face and his arms. Inside of his nose is scorched, like he'd inhaled something blistering hot. His story? He says he reached a clearing, smelled something foul, felt an oven heat come down on him, looked up and saw a dark domed craft hanging overhead, heard a hatch open, and watched a red light float out and bloom into a red mist that rolled over him and burned him. Now, the Air Force's own UFO chief, Captain Edward Ruppelt, ended up calling this the best UFO hoax in history. And DeVerges didn't really help himself. He was kind of known as a pathological liar and sold his story to the papers. And every time he told that story, it got bigger and bigger. So put an asterisk on sunny divergers. But here's the part the asterisk doesn't erase. Divergers could lie about a lot, and probably did. What he could not do is fake the test results of the grass samples taken by the Air Force and shipped to a lab in Dayton, Ohio. The grass had charred roots cooked from underneath, but the blades on top were fine. And he did have burns, both on his hat and his skin, which the boys testified were not there earlier that day. And as one article about this case put it, nothing prevents a compulsive liar from having a supernatural experience. The case is still officially unsolved. A vapor, a burn, and a sample sitting in a lab in Ohio. Remember that lab because it's going to come back around. But let's take a look at another case that some of you might be more familiar with, the Flatwoods Monster. September 12, 1952, a group of 7 witnesses in Flatwoods, West Virginia, follow a fireball streaking across the sky to a hilltop on a local farm. What they find is a pulsating red light and a towering entity, somewhere between 10 and 12 feet tall, with glowing red eyes, a spade-shaped head, and a dark metallic body or skirt. The entity emits a hissing sound, and something, I'm not sure if it's the entity or the ship itself, spews a noxious mist before they all run away, terrified. Several people who were there suffer nausea, throat irritation, and vomiting for days afterward. A reporter who got there maybe within a half an hour smells the acrid odor, and the next morning, investigators find skid marks and an oily black substance at the site. We will be going deeper into this story in a future episode, but for now, we just need to notice the pattern. 17 years, an ocean and a continent apart, strangers who never heard one another's name. And in 1964, in Backwoods, California, every one of those pieces arrive at the same time in front of one man. The others each got a sliver of it, but Don Shrum got the whole machine all night long. Now, for a while, Don keeps the entire ordeal on the down low. He's got a steady job at the missile plant and a family, and a man in his position does not go around saying he fought robots in a tree. Don's mother-in-law knew an astronomer, Victor Killick, who ran the observatory over at Sacramento City College. She gives him a jingle and connects him to Don to have a little chat about what happened. Killick writes the whole thing up and sends it to Mather Air Force Base. Mather Air Force Base says, "Not in our wheelhouse," and kicks it over to McClellan Air Force Base. Within a couple of weeks, Don finds himself meeting with Captain McLeod and Senior Master Sergeant R. Barnes at Captain McLeod's house to tell them his story. This is where things get interesting. As if being gassed by alien robots isn't already interesting. You'd expect, at most, a single officer to swing by, take a statement, file it, and forget it. Instead, a captain and a master sergeant sit down with Don in the captain's own kitchen with a tape recorder running and record the whole account, start to finish. Now, just a little aside here. Don and Judy were invited to Captain McLeod's own home to do this interview, but according to Judy, nothing about that place felt like home. It was nicely furnished, but there were zero personal effects, no pictures, nothing that communicated that anyone actually lived there. She said it was like sitting in a model home. But they went ahead with that taped interview, and Don told them everything. He even drew them a map. Mistake. Little did Don know, but that tape and the report that came off it would travel a lot farther up the Air Force chain than a lost hunter's tall tale ever should. The Air Force guys listened to the whole story, and then, at their request, Don hands over one of his arrowheads. He says it's the one that still had a smear of grayish metal on the blade from the thing he hit. Then the captain starts working down a list of things it could have been instead, including teenagers in costumes pulling a prank, Air Force trainees out on a night exercise, and my favorite, Japanese soldiers left over from the war. Maybe he'd been drinking. Maybe he'd hallucinated all of it. But Don doesn't budge. As far as the teenagers, Don says he finds it highly unlikely that there was a bunch of teenagers dressed in spacesuits way out in the middle of nowhere. And it wasn't soldiers on training exercises. That was the first call Don's mother-in-law made when she heard about all of this. The Air Force Base said, wasn't us. And the Japanese? I'll just let you marinate on that one for a while. Now, weigh the two halves of that. To Don's face and on the official file, the answer was a shrug. The official report would say maybe it was an owl, maybe his imagination. But that interview did not stay in Sacramento. The tape and the arrowhead got forwarded clear across the country to the Foreign Technology Division at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio, the office that ran the government's whole UFO operation. They sent back a list of pointed follow-up questions and asked for everything on file. That is not how a serious institution handles a story it has decided is Japanese soldiers running through the forest. And it's the same Dayton, Ohio ground, by the way, that the Scoutmaster's charred grass sample had been shipped to 12 years before. Don and his friends went back to the site a couple weeks later. They found it raked, cleaned, nothing but cigarette and cigar butts and rake marks all over the clearing, like a crew had gone over the ground and tidied it up. I guess that map he drew came in handy. The men who told Don it was probably nothing had apparently been very, very interested in the nothing. The only thing left of interest was the third arrow Don found in a bush. In front of Don's face, they just shrugged. The tape forwarded to Ohio, the arrowhead pulled into the file, the raked ground. That was the real reaction. And then there's that one arrowhead, the one Don handed over, because it ended up somewhere very specific, and where it went tells you exactly how this case was meant to end. Don's arrowhead, the one he handed to the captain, did not stay in an Air Force evidence locker. By the Air Force's own letter, it was never analyzed at all. The tip was not subjected to any laboratory analysis. It has been loaned to the University of Colorado UFO Study Group, and, as of yet, has not been returned to Mr. Shrum. Now, if you don't know the history, that sounds so cute. The University of Colorado UFO Study Group. Sounds like a bunch of geeked out college kids sitting around and deciding what they're going to say when they meet their first alien. At least that's what it sounds like. And that is exactly the problem. Because in the mid-1960s, the University of Colorado wasn't just the home of an after-school flying saucer club. The University of Colorado was the home of the Condon Committee. And the Condon Committee was the United States Air Force's official hand-picked government-funded study of the entire UFO phenomena. Hundreds of thousands of dollars of Air Force money, run by Edward Condon, one of the most decorated physicists in the country. This was not a hobby club. This was the study the government commissioned to settle the matter for good. So Don's arrow, the one thing to make solid contact with the metal robot, possibly retaining trace evidence, didn't go to some neutral lab. It went into the one official channel built to render a verdict on all of it. And we know, in writing, what that verdict was always going to be. 2 years before the report came out, one of the project's own coordinators put it on paper in a private memo. Our study would be conducted almost entirely by non-believers who, though they couldn't possibly prove a negative result, could, and probably would, add an impressive body of thick evidence that there is no reality to the observations. The trick would be, I would think, to describe the project so that, to the public, it would appear a totally objective study, but to the scientific community would present the image of a group of non-believers trying their best to be objective, but having an almost zero expectation of finding a saucer. That memo got out. It nearly tore the committee apart from the inside, and it told you the ending before the thing was even written. And sure enough, in 1968, the Condon report drops. 1,000 pages, and its conclusion is essentially this. We've looked There's nothing there worth science's time. Go home. The press loved it. And the very next year, 1969, the Air Force used that report as its reason to shut down Project Blue Book and get out of the public-facing UFO business forever. That's the turn in this story, and it's a quiet one, so I want to make sure you catch it. Don Shrum's night gets framed two ways at once. To him and to the public, it's just shrug, and maybe it was the Japanese. And his one piece of hard evidence gets handed, very respectably, to the University of Colorado, which sounds like fairness, but in fact was the official machine whose whole job was to make the subject go away. The dismissal and the investigation were the same act. They took it seriously by making certain no one else ever could. So, where does that leave us with Don Shrum? I can't tell you what was in those trees in September of 1964. I wasn't there, and neither were you, and there's exactly one man who was, and he's the only one who saw the robots. But Don Shrum never cashed in. He hid his own name for decades to protect his job, and he turned away the reporters and the publishers who came knocking to keep it quiet. He told the same story, the same way, for over 50 years, to investigators whose entire goal was to catch him changing it. And he never did. The hardest skeptics who sat across from him came away saying they couldn't find the seam. In his account, the no-neck figures, the helmeted shapes, the vapor that knocks you out, reaches back to a painter in Italy in 1947 and out to a robot in West Virginia in 1952 in details he had no way to borrow. While the file says owl and imagination, the same government was forwarding his tape to Wright-Patterson, raking away the evidence at the scene and routing that arrowhead into the one study built to bury the question. They didn't act like men investigating a prank. They acted like men cleaning up. I told you there was something older than the Air Force underneath all of this. And here it is. Long before any of it, the researcher Jacques Vallée pointed to an old book of European legends from 1836 describing the fairy folk, the things that were said to live in the woods and in the hills. And the old line about them went like this: if a mortal dares come near them, they open their mouth, and the breath that escapes from it strikes him down, poisoned. Open their mouth, the breath that strikes you down. We called them owls in 1836. We called them robots in 1964. Maybe we keep meeting the same thing out in the woods, and all that ever changes is the word that we've got for it. I don't know, but I know that Don Shrum spent one night in a pine tree finding out. And I know the United States Air Force wanted his arrows badly enough to come and get them. You decide what that adds up to. If a lost man alone in the trees, holding up something he can't explain until the sun comes up, is the kind of weird story you love, I've got another one waiting right here. I guarantee it's just as weird as this one. Be careful out there, and I will see you here again on the In-Between.